There are moments in life when a single sentence can erase years of lies. For one frightened young housemaid standing silently inside a mansion that never truly felt like home, that moment arrived without warning. It began with a simple mistake, or at least that was what everyone in the room believed. A glass of fresh orange juice crashed against the polished marble floor, sending sharp pieces of crystal in every direction. The bright stain spread across the expensive rug while the young maid stood completely still, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She had learned long ago that silence was often safer than speaking. Across the dining room, the wealthy woman who owned the mansion pointed at her with unmistakable disgust. Every insult was delivered loudly enough for the servants, the gardener, and even the guests waiting outside to hear. She called the young woman careless. She called her useless. She insisted that people like her would never amount to anything because they were born to serve those who had earned success. The maid simply whispered an apology, though everyone knew the spilled drink wasn't entirely her fault. Nobody came to her defense. Nobody ever did. Then everything changed. Before another harsh word could leave the wealthy woman's mouth, the sound of tires rolling over the stone driveway echoed through the estate. Conversations stopped. The security guards straightened their jackets. Even the family members gathered near the entrance turned their attention toward the front gate. A long black luxury SUV came to a slow stop outside the mansion. The driver stepped out first before opening the rear door for a man whose face was instantly recognized by everyone present. He was one of the country's most respected self-made millionaires, known not only for his extraordinary success in business but also for quietly changing thousands of lives through charitable work. His unexpected arrival made no sense. No meeting had been scheduled. No invitation had been announced. Yet there he was, walking through the front doors with calm confidence as though he already knew exactly where he needed to be. The wealthy homeowner forced a welcoming smile and hurried toward him, expecting a handshake or perhaps a polite greeting. Instead, he walked past her without saying a single word. His eyes searched the room until they settled on the young maid who was still standing beside the broken glass, her cheeks wet with tears she had tried so desperately to hide. For several long seconds he simply looked at her, as if trying to confirm something he had hoped, and feared, for years. The room fell into complete silence. Every servant stopped moving. Every family member watched without understanding what was happening. The millionaire finally took one slow step closer, looked directly into the frightened young woman's eyes, and spoke words that would leave everyone inside that mansion questioning everything they thought they knew. "I've spent 5 years looking for you." The maid's expression changed from fear to complete disbelief. The color drained from the wealthy woman's face as though she had just seen a ghost. No one else understood why those few words carried so much weight, but she did. Hidden beneath years of carefully protected secrets was a truth she had prayed would never come to light. She knew that if the millionaire had finally found the woman standing before him, the perfect life she had built on appearances was about to collapse. What nobody inside that mansion realized was that this meeting had begun years earlier with one impossible act of courage, a forgotten promise, and a sacrifice that had never been repaid. The young woman everyone dismissed as just the maid had been carrying a story so extraordinary that once it came to light, nothing, and no one, would ever be the same again. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The maid, however, looked completely overwhelmed. Her hands were still shaking, not because of the harsh humiliation she had just endured, but because she couldn't understand why one of the most influential men in the city was standing in front of her as though she were the person he had been searching for all along. Had they met before? Had she forgotten something important? Or was he mistaking her for someone else? Those questions raced through her mind, but before she could gather the courage to speak, she noticed something even more unsettling. The wealthy woman was desperately trying to interrupt the moment, forcing a nervous smile as she stepped between them, hoping to regain control of a situation that was slipping further from her grasp with every passing second. The servants exchanged uneasy glances. They had witnessed years of insults, impossible demands, and endless humiliation directed toward the young maid, but never had they seen their employer lose her composure. Even her husband, who had quietly observed the cruel treatment from a distance more times than he cared to admit, stood frozen in disbelief. He couldn't understand why his wife's hands were trembling or why she suddenly seemed so desperate to end the conversation before it had truly begun. Something wasn't adding up. The millionaire hadn't arrived by accident. His confidence suggested that he already knew far more about this family than anyone realized. But what exactly had brought him here? Why had his search lasted 5 years? And why did the sight of one frightened housemaid seem to answer every question he had carried all that time? As silence filled the room once again, another mystery quietly emerged. If the young woman everyone dismissed as insignificant was truly the person the millionaire had been searching for, then who was she before she arrived at this mansion? Why had she never spoken about her past? Why did she choose to endure years of humiliation instead of walking away? Most importantly, what truth was the wealthy woman so determined to keep hidden? The answers were buried in events that stretched back years before anyone in that mansion had ever heard the young maid's name. They began with an act of extraordinary kindness, a heartbreaking sacrifice, and a promise made during one of the darkest nights in another family's life. That promise had never been forgotten by the millionaire. And now, standing face to face with the woman who had changed everything, he was finally ready to reveal why finding her had become the most important mission of his life. Long before the black SUV rolled through the gates and long before the millionaire looked into the frightened young maid's eyes and said he had spent 5 years searching for her, there was a mansion that many people in the city admired from a distance. It stood behind tall wrought iron gates lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and towering oak trees that offered just enough privacy to keep curious eyes away. Neighbors often described it as the most beautiful property on the street. But those who judged the mansion by its appearance could never hear the sharp voices that echoed behind its closed doors or see the tears quietly wiped away before anyone else entered the room. The walls protected more than wealth. They protected a painful truth that almost nobody outside the estate ever suspected. The family living inside seemed equally impressive. At least, that was the image they worked tirelessly to maintain. The lady of the house was admired in public for her elegant appearance, generous donations to charity events, and polished speeches about kindness and compassion. She attended fundraisers, appeared in newspaper photographs beside influential people, and was often praised for supporting organizations that claimed to help struggling families. She treated every expensive suit and elegant dress with extraordinary care, reading every label twice before washing or ironing a single item. But when the wealthy woman inspected the finished work, she searched relentlessly for imperfections. A sleeve folded a little differently from the day before became proof of carelessness. A towel placed a few inches from its usual position became evidence that the maid wasn't paying attention. More than once, clothes that had already been perfectly ironed were thrown back onto the floor with instructions to start all over again. The maid never protested. She simply picked them up, returned to the laundry room, and continued working until her hands ached from holding the hot iron for hours. By evening, exhaustion settled into every part of her body, but the work still wasn't finished. Dinner had to be prepared with the same precision expected from a professional chef. She remembered every favorite meal, every ingredient the family disliked, and every small detail that made each dinner special. Guests often complimented the delicious food, believing the wealthy woman herself deserved the praise. The maid stood quietly in the background, smiling politely without expecting recognition. Yet as soon as the guests were gone, the wealthy woman's attitude changed once again. She complained that the vegetables had been overcooked, that the meat lacked seasoning, or that dessert should never have been served before coffee. On one occasion, she pushed an untouched plate across the table and ordered the maid to prepare an entirely new meal, even though everyone else had finished eating. Hours later, while the family slept peacefully upstairs, the maid remained alone in the kitchen washing dishes, cleaning countertops, and preparing breakfast for the following morning. The husband noticed far more than he allowed anyone to realize. Sitting quietly at the dining table, he watched the way the maid lowered her eyes each time another harsh remark was directed at her. He noticed how carefully she hid the redness in her hands after spending hours cleaning and ironing. He saw the quiet determination with which she continued working despite receiving almost no kindness in return. Just an ordinary young woman on her way home after finishing a long shift at work. Without asking who she was or expecting anything in return, the young woman wrapped her own jacket around the frightened teenager, bought her food with the little money she had earned that day, and stayed beside her until help could be found. When the teenager became ill from exhaustion and dehydration, the young woman took her to the nearest hospital, gave a false name to protect the frightened girl's privacy from curious strangers gathering outside the emergency room, and quietly disappeared before anyone thought to ask who had brought her there. By the time the millionaire arrived at the hospital after receiving an anonymous phone call, his younger sister was finally safe. But the woman responsible for saving her life was gone. Hospital employees remembered her kindness. A nurse recalled how she refused to leave until the frightened girl was receiving proper care. A doctor remembered that she insisted no one should thank her because, in her own words, anyone would have done the same. But they were wrong. Not everyone would have. When the millionaire tried to learn her identity, no one could provide a complete answer. The name written on the hospital paperwork turned out to be incomplete. The address didn't exist. The telephone number led nowhere. It was as though the woman had stepped into their lives just long enough to save his sister before disappearing back into the shadows without waiting for gratitude, recognition, or reward. Most people would have accepted never knowing. The millionaire couldn't. He made himself a promise. One day, no matter how long it took, he would find the woman who had protected his sister when the rest of the world couldn't. That promise became a quiet mission that continued for 5 years. Now, sitting alone in his office late into the night, he reopened every file connected to that case. Old hospital records lay scattered across his desk beside faded newspaper clippings and photographs collected over years of searching. He carefully compared signatures, witness statements, and forgotten notes that had seemed meaningless at the time. One retired nurse remembered that the young woman who brought the teenager to the hospital had mentioned working as a domestic helper to support herself. Another witness described her as remarkably polite, speaking softly even under pressure. An old security camera photograph, though blurry, captured only part of her face before she walked away forever. The millionaire looked from the faded photograph to the image printed from the mansion's security footage earlier that evening. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same gentle expression. The same quiet posture. The same scar on the left wrist. Then he noticed something else. A name buried deep inside one of the oldest interview notes. It had been dismissed years earlier because investigators believed it was incomplete. But now it stood out more clearly than ever before. The Maid. His heart pounded as realization slowly replaced uncertainty. Had the answer been hiding in plain sight all along? Or was he allowing hope to cloud his judgment after searching for so many years? There was only one way to know for certain. Could the young maid serving inside that mansion really be the same woman who had once risked everything to save his sister, and then disappeared without asking for anything in return? The following morning, the millionaire did something he had done countless times over the previous 5 years, but this time it felt different. Hope had returned, and with it came a determination stronger than ever before. He instructed his private investigator to avoid attracting attention. There would be no confrontation, no public accusations, and no assumptions. Every fact had to be verified before a single word was spoken. If the young maid truly was the woman who had saved his younger sister all those years ago, then he owed her more than gratitude. He owed her the truth. And if someone had deliberately hidden that truth, he intended to uncover every detail, no matter where it led. The investigation began with the mansion itself. Public records revealed very little about the maid. According to employment documents, she had arrived at the estate just under 5 years earlier, only a few weeks after the millionaire's younger sister had been found. There were no references from previous employers, no emergency contacts, and almost nothing about her life before she entered the mansion. It was unusual. Most employers demanded complete records before hiring someone to work inside their home, especially someone responsible for caring for valuable property. There was a hospital admission record dated 5 years earlier. There was a photograph taken from a hospital security camera showing a young woman standing beside his frightened sister shortly before quietly leaving the building. Time had faded the image, but one detail remained unmistakable. The small scar on the young woman's left wrist. The millionaire slowly turned toward the maid. "I never had the chance to thank the woman who stayed beside my sister when she had no one else." The maid stared silently at the photographs. A strange feeling settled over her. The faces. The hospital. The hallway. For brief moments, memories she couldn't fully understand seemed to flicker through her mind before disappearing again. She pressed her fingers gently against her temple as though trying to reach something hidden just beyond her memory. The millionaire continued speaking. "You didn't ask for recognition. You didn't accept the reward. You disappeared before anyone even learned your name. You simply walked away after making sure my sister was safe." His voice became softer. "My family has prayed for the opportunity to thank you ever since." The servants watched in complete disbelief. The elderly gardener quietly wiped tears from his eyes. The husband looked from the photographs to the maid, struggling to reconcile everything he thought he knew with everything unfolding before him. The wealthy woman suddenly laughed. It wasn't the laughter of someone amused. It was forced. Sharp. Uncomfortable. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "You're making an unbelievable mistake. She's just a housemaid. She probably resembles the woman in those old pictures, but resemblance isn't proof." For a brief moment, uncertainty returned to the room. Then one of the attorneys stepped forward. Without saying a word, he placed another sealed folder on the table before opening it. Inside were certified hospital records. Employment documents. Witness statements collected over the previous 24 hours. Signed affidavits from the retired nurse who remembered the young woman refusing recognition. A statement from the doctor who treated the millionaire's younger sister. And finally, a forensic comparison prepared that very morning, confirming the distinctive scar visible in both the hospital photographs and on the maid's wrist. The wealthy woman's smile disappeared. No one spoke. The silence inside the mansion became almost unbearable. Then the elderly nurse slowly stepped forward. She looked at the maid for several long seconds before tears filled her eyes. "I never forgot your face," she whispered. "You stayed awake all night beside that frightened girl. You refused to leave until I promised she'd be safe. I've prayed for years that someone would find you." The maid's breathing became unsteady. Fragments of forgotten memories continued pushing against the walls of her mind. She couldn't explain why the hospital suddenly felt familiar. Or why hearing those words filled her heart with emotions she couldn't understand. The millionaire took one final step toward her. "There is no amount of money that could ever repay what you did for my family," he said. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life honoring the kindness you showed when you expected nothing in return." He paused before continuing. "I recently established a charitable foundation dedicated to helping vulnerable women rebuild their lives after hardship. It was created in memory of my father's belief that compassion changes lives more than wealth ever could." He smiled gently. "I would like you to lead that foundation." Gasps echoed across the room. The maid stared at him in complete disbelief. She had entered the mansion years earlier with nothing. Now she was being offered a position that would allow her to change thousands of lives. The wealthy woman couldn't believe what she was hearing. "And today, you've reminded every person in this room what true strength looks like." Those words pierced the wealthy woman's heart more deeply than any public accusation could have. For years, she had believed respect came from status. From expensive jewelry. From influence. From appearances. She suddenly realized that the people standing around her weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking at the maid. The very woman she had spent years trying to make feel insignificant had become the person everyone respected most. In that moment, the wealthy woman understood something she had never learned despite all her success. Respect cannot be demanded. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be bought. It is given freely to those whose actions deserve it. And she had spent years throwing it away. The husband slowly stepped forward. His face carried the weight of regret that had been building since the previous evening. He looked first at the maid, then at his wife. "There is something I should have done a long time ago," he said quietly. He turned toward the maid. "I owe you an apology." His voice trembled. "I saw far more than I admitted to myself. I watched you work harder than anyone else in this house. I heard words that should never have been spoken to another human being. Every time I remained silent, I convinced myself I was keeping peace inside my family. But silence isn't peace. Silence allows injustice to grow. And for that, I am deeply sorry." The maid looked at him with the same quiet compassion she had shown everyone else. The husband then faced his wife. His expression was calm but resolute. "This house was built with money," he said. "But a home is built with kindness. Somewhere along the way, we stopped having a home." The wealthy woman lowered her head. For the first time in years, she had no argument. No excuse. No one left to blame. The image she had spent a lifetime creating had fallen apart, not because someone tried to destroy it, but because the truth had finally been allowed to speak. As the afternoon sun poured through the mansion's tall windows, everyone present understood they had witnessed something far greater than a confrontation. They had witnessed the quiet victory of humility over pride, compassion over cruelty, and truth over deception. Nothing inside that mansion would ever be the same again. The husband devoted more time to supporting charitable causes and rebuilding relationships that years of silence had damaged. He openly admitted that looking away from injustice had been one of the greatest mistakes of his life. He often spoke at community events about the importance of standing up for others, even when doing so felt uncomfortable. His message was simple. The right moment to do what's right is never tomorrow. It's today. The wealthy woman, however, withdrew almost entirely from public life. Invitations to social events became less frequent. The image she had spent years carefully creating slowly disappeared, not because anyone publicly shamed her, but because people began seeing her differently after learning the truth. She no longer sought attention. Instead, she spent long periods reflecting on the choices that had led her there. Regret has a way of arriving quietly, often long after the opportunity to make different decisions has passed. For the first time in many years, she began to understand that influence means very little if it isn't matched by compassion. One cool autumn morning, several months after the foundation opened its doors, a familiar car slowly pulled into the parking lot. The former maid was speaking with a group of young women outside the building when she noticed someone stepping out of the vehicle. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. It was the wealthy woman. She wasn't dressed for a charity gala. There were no photographers waiting nearby. No reporters. No audience. Just two women whose lives had become forever connected by choices neither of them could erase. The wealthy woman walked slowly toward her, stopping several feet away. The confidence that had once defined her was gone. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the wealthy woman lowered her eyes. "I've rehearsed this conversation more times than I can count," she said quietly. "Every version sounded different in my mind. None of them felt good enough." She paused, struggling to continue. I spent years convincing myself I was better than other people because of what I owned, where I lived, and the life I had built. I was so focused on protecting my pride that I stopped seeing the humanity in the people around me. Her voice trembled. I can't give you back the years you lost. I can't erase the words I spoke. And I can't undo the pain I caused. A tear rolled gently down her cheek. But I am truly sorry. The former maid listened without interrupting. She remembered every difficult morning. Every sleepless night. Every harsh word that had once made her question her own worth. She also remembered the promise she had made to herself the day she chose forgiveness, that she would never allow yesterday's pain to steal tomorrow's peace. After a long silence, she offered a gentle smile. I accepted your apology the day I decided not to let bitterness control my future. The wealthy woman looked up. The former maid continued softly. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply refuses to let the past decide what comes next. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Then the former maid extended her hand. The wealthy woman accepted it with quiet gratitude. There were no dramatic celebrations. No applause. No perfect ending where every wound instantly disappeared. Some scars remain. But scars don't have to define the rest of a person's life. As the wealthy woman walked back toward her car, she glanced over her shoulder one final time. She watched the former maid return to the group of young women waiting outside the foundation. They surrounded her with smiles, questions, and hopeful conversations about the future. It was then that the wealthy woman fully understood what she had lost years earlier, not a servant, but the opportunity to recognize extraordinary character while it stood right in front of her. The millionaire arrived a few minutes later and quietly watched the foundation come alive with activity. Young women laughed together, volunteers prepared classrooms, and families entered the building with hope instead of fear. None of it would have existed without one ordinary act of kindness that had taken place 5 years earlier on a lonely roadside, performed by a young woman who never expected anyone to remember her name. Sometimes life has a remarkable way of revealing that the people the world overlooks are often the very people capable of changing it. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming the person they never believed you could be. And now we'd love to hear from you. If you had been in her position, would you have chosen forgiveness or walked away forever? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.